So I want to move on then in our discussions to Andy Warhol, who was really the first high priest of the cult and religion of the dead celebrity. Now, he's also kind of, I think of him as a kind of monk or a priest who was also a great icon painter, kind of like, let's say, Andrei Rublev, that Tarkovsky makes the great film about, who was an icon painter in the Russian church who painted icons of the saints. And in a certain sense, I think we can regard Andy Warhol, who came out of Pittsburgh and from a Greek Orthodox family, but from an Orthodox background, or at least in Pittsburgh, there was a heavy Orthodox influence. And in the Orthodox tradition, we have the great icons of the saints that are painted all through that tradition. And that church there in Pittsburgh had some influence on the shaping of Warhol's imagination. So we have this, he brings to art this sensibility, this early sensibility imprinted with the significance of saints, and moves to New York City, and he becomes involved in ad art, advertising and graphic design, where he works doing illustrations for magazines for a while, before he stumbles across this religion of the dead celebrity, and he more or less becomes its first high priest, painting these the icons of these avatars. He was born in 1928, and he dies in 1987, so those are his main dates. And his first great painting then is really the Gold Marilyn of 1962. And that painting simply features an image of Marilyn. It's a publicity still taken from the film Niagara, which is one of Marilyn's early, I believe it's a color film, but it's one of her early films. And he puts it on a gold background, so the entire background is gold. And in that sense, it is very much like a Byzantine painting of a saint against a gold background. So he's consciously alluding to this tradition of the representation of the saints against the gold background with this cult of the celebrity avatar. And he says that he was inspired to paint Marilyn because of her death. This was in 1962, just after she had died, and he found out about it. And that death then motivated him to create this painting, almost like the death of a saint, that motivates the creation of the cult of the saint. So these really are saints in the age of electronic stained glass that we're dealing with here. And Warhol was one of the first great creators of the actual cult itself, the architecture of the cult of reverence for the electronically mediated avatar of the two-dimensional avatar of the electronically mediated celebrity. He's really he's the St. Paul of this tradition, the first organizer and proselytizer of the religion of the dead celebrity. So he starts out with these Marilyn paintings and these Elvis paintings. Prior to that, he'd been doing the famous soup cans, which just show rows of serial repetition and mass reproduction. Not much to those paintings, really. But when we come to the images, which are kind of visual OCD, this repetition of the image of the celebrity is a kind of, it puts him more or less in the role of a kind of a modified celebrity stalker. He's obsessed with these celebrities, and he even was a kind of stalker of Truman Capote for a while. He followed him around everywhere early on in his life, until Capote's mother told him to get lost, and he stopped doing that. So there is a certain degree to which he represents a glorified stalker who happens to have artistic skills and abilities and can transform his obsession into a movement in art with the creation of pop art that actually affects the history of art itself. So we have the Golden Marilyn, and then he paints about the same time. The best of the Marilyn paintings is really the Marilyn diptych, which is two sets of Marilyn's reproduction images going 5 down and 5 across on two sides of the panel. One in the left panel in Technicolor, vivid Technicolor, and the right panel in black and white, and it's a kind of grainy, smudged black and white. On the one hand, we're reminded of the fact that the early Marilyn films were in black and white and the later films were in color, so there is that to that painting. But there is also the fact, I think, that the Technicolor Marilyns are the vivid Marilyn that we remember, the avataric Marilyn. And it points to this dichotomy. We recall that everything about Marilyn was a dichotomy. Everything occurs in twos. Marilyn Monroe, the alliteration of the M there in her name, for instance. And so in the diptych we have two separate Marilyn icons, and the one, the Technicolor Marilyn, I think alludes to Marilyn as we remember her, this visual, brilliantly beautiful visual icon, like something out of a Van Gogh painting, only it happens to be a woman. We remember her this way. This is her two-dimensional avatar. But I think the badly smudged and eroded black and white Marilyns, the rows of reproductions, could also allude to the state and nature of the real Marilyn psyche. That the cost of the erection of this vivid Technicolor Marilyn drained her psyche. She was badly eroded emotionally. She was emotionally deprived and in need of care and help and nurturing and motherance, and was always looking for father figures and also mother figures to help her. And the psychological damage that accelerating her image to light speed did to her is brilliantly captured in this early diptych by Andy Warhol, I think, quite brilliantly. So he's beginning to feel this out now, and he hears about the possibility that Liz Taylor might die, so he starts painting her image. He paints these early Elvises. The early Elvis, the red Elvis, just shows Elvis in rose, a headshot only, as though it were soaked in blood, as though he were conscious of the Dionysus cult, the Dionysus aspects that Elvis Presley recaptured. Dionysus was the god of wine and also a kind of Greek version of rock and roll. The Bacchanalia cults were the Bacchanals consisted of singers that went around the countryside, singing and tearing animals to pieces with their teeth and drinking blood, and it was a very bloody cult. So the red Elvis kind of is suggestive of that. And it also makes us recall the fact that the wine press gave birth to the printing press. When Gutenberg invented the printing press, it was originally a wine press used for crushing the grapes, and he simply applied that to the letter press, and so we get, as it were, the god Dionysus giving birth to the repetition of the printed image, which itself is the first technology that mass reproduced images. So with the mass reproduction of the Elvis dipped in blood there, we've got all of that, all of these associations compressed into these images. Then he gives, with the Elvis 1 and 2, which is similar to the Marilyn diptych, he paints Elvis on one side in Technicolor and on the other side in black and white. And it's him from a film called, I think, Flaming Star, in which it's a Western. And all the Elvis movies are very bad films. None of them are worth watching. But it's a still from that film that shows him dressed as a cowboy, which alludes subtly to the fact that Elvis's early music was based on a synthesis of country and Western music with the rhythm and blues music of the black man. So you have this twofold aspect to his early music. His early films were also in black and white. His later films were in color. And then he paints another thing, the silver Elvis, or the three Elvis threefold, I forget the title, but it shows the same image only repeated 3 times, overlapping with each other, and it's dipped in silver this time. And Warhol said that silver reminded him of the modern. It's spacey. The astronauts were in silver, and it referred to the silver screen, and also to the fact that the backs of mirrors are painted in silver. So we have this conscious allusion to the process of Hollywood, the silver screen, that is one of the media that replicates avatars and shoots the image of the celebrity, transforms it into a 2-dimensional light speed avatar, and sends it orbiting around the Earth. Now this is the other thing I think that Warhol was sensitive to in sort of building this cult and culture of the dead celebrity, is that we now, he himself was captured by the celebrity avatar, but we ourselves, since the 60s, have been captured as a society by the celebrity avatar. And now with our satellite technologies, we saw how the geosynchronous satellites of Howard Hughes went into orbit at the same time that Warhol is doing these paintings, and that these satellites start shooting these electromagnetic signals around the Earth, which shoot the avatars of dead celebrities through television reruns, music, radio signals going around. All of this etheric envelope, this cocoon of dead celebrities encoded in electromagnetic signals traveling at the speed of light, now begins to surround the Earth like a sheath. An exact image. It's basically a technologization of the ancient Greek and Roman cosmology of the Earth being surrounded and encased by etheric spheres. These spheres were made out of a 5th element, ether. We had the Earth itself made out of earth, air, fire, and water. But the spheres were made out of ether, and they turned in perfect circular motion. Each one carried a planet as a little bubble on the surface of the sphere along with it, and made a different sound, so that each of the 7 spheres corresponded to a different note of the diatonic scale, and as the spheres turned, they created what was known as the music of the spheres. This goes back to Pythagoras. And these spheres, too, in the Christian cosmology, especially as we find it inflected in Dante, in the Christian cosmology, these spheres have the souls of the dead in them. As Dante journeys down through hell, goes up purgatory, and then begins his journey up through the spheres, he meets dead saints in these spheres. So these spheres were infected with the souls of dead ancestors and saints and angels, exactly as our technologized version of these spheres now, with a sphere of electromagnetic pulse radiation encasing the Earth in this, basically the avatars, the icons of dead celebrities, which now have surrounded us by means of the aid of this technology. We have Elvis's live from Hawaii Aloha concert in 1973 as the world's first live concert, beamed all over the planet, capable of being watched in real time live by means of the geosynchronous satellites of Howard Hughes. So this is what I meant when I said that Howard Hughes is the creator of the proscenium, the world stage, on which this cult of the drama of the dead, the dying and reviving celebrity, is acted out. And Warhol is really the first great artist to begin to be sensitive to this, that we are now surrounded and encased as a culture inside the world of the dead celebrity, the sahus and avatars of dead celebrities. And it really is as though he were a kind of Egyptian priest mummifying the sahus of the dead celebrities and storing them in the niches in the cavernous underground of his New York apartment. That really is what he is doing here, I think, in a symbolic way, but it corresponds very much so. And I think the other thing to note about his images is that they have a kind of poor, low quality, grainy resolution to them. They are what McLuhan would have called cool images insofar as they require fill-in, they require completion on the part of the viewer to interact with them. And they really represent the first paintings in the history of art to be influenced by the television screen. He himself was conscious about this. He even pointed it out, that the image, the fuzzy, grainy, pixelated image of a television screen inspired him to do some of these images. They were direct imitations of it, and the actual print silk screening process of creating the image itself involves pixelating it. Exactly as the image, the low resolution image that appears on all of these video monitors. So his art too is registering simultaneously the capture of our consciousness by the celebrity and also by the self-luminous video screen that now surrounds us everywhere we go. And his paintings are the first to exhibit the influence of the low resolution, low quality, poor quality image that requires a very high participation on the part of the viewer to complete it. And his art too was very participatory. It depended to a large degree on the output of the crazies who surrounded him at the factory in New York. He listened to them. He would sometimes ask them what he should paint next, and then he would take their advice and apply it. So it was really a collective undertaking. It's a very highly participational type of art. So this is what Warhol starts doing in the early 60s. This is 62, 63, thereabouts. And then he starts to do a different series of paintings, which he calls the death and disaster paintings. And in these paintings, he's taking the photographs of car crashes and people committing suicide by jumping off of buildings, and he's putting them through the silkscreen process, and he's duplicating the images. And he said at this point he wanted to shift from the famous person to the famous nobody. And I think that Warhol really was the first to be sensitive to the coming, via now with YouTube and Facebook and reality television, to the coming of the oxymoron of the anonymous celebrity, the famous nobody. You don't have to be famous in this society. You don't have to be anybody, rather, in this society to become famous. You simply have to get in front of a camera that accelerates your image around the world, and you're on. And that's all it takes. It doesn't require any special skill or ability whatsoever. And I think Warhol was the prophet of this entire age that is unfolding now right before us. He was the prophet. He's the key linchpin in the transition of the cult and culture of the famous celebrity to the democratization of the cult of fame to all the rest of us. Very much analogous to the fact that, in ancient Egypt, in the Old Kingdom Egypt, it was only the pharaoh who got all of this, who had access to the mummification process and the sending of his sahu, his soul, up to the heavens to join the stars around the circumpolar stars. That technology was unique to him, until with the coming of the Middle Kingdom and the first intermediate period before it, that technology was democratized and slowly became available to everybody else, who could therefore participate in this famous cult of, the famous pharaoh. Everyone else could participate in the democratization of this technology, as it was democratized first to the nobles, who started having themselves mummified as well and being buried in these expensive coffins, until by the time, right at the end of the Old Kingdom, actually, you can see this happening with the nobles beginning to construct elaborate tombs that rival and compete with the tombs of the pharaohs. So you can see their status rising here at the expense of the pharaoh. And the nobles are really what pulled apart the rise of their egos, really was what pulled apart Old Kingdom Egypt. And so, by analogy here, I think Warhol is the first to see this coming. He's aware that fame is going to be something that's going to be democratized because of the nature of the media that it takes place in. The medium really is the message here. It doesn't matter whether you have any talent or special abilities, you simply have to step in front of a camera